client's name was Reginald Burks, and he was charged with murder. Accusation was that he shot into a van that was parked on the side of the street. The bullet went through a kid's head. My client said that these people shot at him first. And these people are like, of course, we don't have a gun. This guy's just making it all up.
You provide the service of the truth. So let's go through the murder case that we were talking about. Because the reason I want to go dive into this is because oftentimes people don't have that good of an association to lawyers, especially because of advertising lawyers. When they do focus groups, they survey the sentiment of lawyers, and it's not so hot compared to other professions. And I think this will give people a lot of empathy for what a lawyer goes through in the tall order of handling something like a murder case.
All right, so this is probably about 10 years ago, and a client's name was Reginald Burks, and he was charged with murder, and the accusation was that he shot into a minivan that was parked on the side of the street, and the police only found him because they had arrested this other individual for the murder named Chris Bohannon. But these neighborhoods, everybody knows each other, and so everybody knew that Reginald was involved in the shooting, not Bohannon. But the people in the car had all picked out this guy, Chris Bohannon, from a lineup, which you think that even the most dumbest cop would realize if 5 people pick out one individual in a lineup, and that individual is not an individual that had anything to actually do with the case, factually, and somebody else comes forward and says, I was the one there, not this guy, you think that would be the first sign that perhaps those people in the car might have been framing somebody. Because this Bohannon gentleman was in jail for about 3 weeks before Reginald went to the police and said, hey, that shooting that took place, that was me that was there, not Bohannon. And so what the police did, of course, was release Bohannon and arrest Reginald and put him in jail. And he stayed there for about a few months until he could make bail. But I used to go visit him every Saturday, which was not very fun because jails are disgusting places. But I just remember one Saturday, because he's always kind of trying to keep an upbeat spirit, but you're locked up. You've never been locked up before. You've never done anything wrong before. It's a unique experience. Because I remember saying to him, I was like, everything, I said, we're all here and whatever for some reason that we can't always understand. Why are you locked up right now when you're an innocent man? I said, but I think part of it is that because of this experience you're having, that everything you've always taken for granted in your life, the fact that you can go home, hug your wife and kid, eat when you want, go to the bathroom when you want, that you'll recognize that every one of those things every moment of life is a gift. Once you get past this, right now, this is all we have. But when you get past this, you realize that all these things we take for granted, you will really appreciate. You have an appreciation for life that, folks never have. And I just kind of remember that. And I also remember the day when he finally got out of jail. He was on bond still, right? And, because we were having a little get together and he came to the get together and it was so exciting to see him not in jail. But, when somebody's life is in your hands, truly their life is in your hands, it's the most stressful experience. You have a lot of people's well-beings and who've trusted you with their futures because you run a large organization, you have a lot of employees, right? So those people all trust you to lead them and that you're going to help them have a better life. Well, that's a lot of responsibility. But when it's actually a life or death situation, it's the kind of thing that, that's why trial lawyers have a lot of, alcohol and substance abuse problems, because when somebody is like, you can't, in a murder, you don't sleep, you might sleep 3 hours at night because all you do is think and think.
If you don't prove he's innocent, he's going to jail arguably for life.
Correct. And that's a good way to frame it, because you truly have to prove in a lot of cases that your client's basically is innocent. Because reasonable doubt, it's a nice concept, but most jurors consider it to be a technicality to let a guilty person go. A reasonable doubt. But that was a real harrowing experience because we're 2 days into the trial and this young lawyer, we're looking at the pictures from the car, and she'd done some work with the Innocence Project. She was all into forensics because I was operating under self-defense, which is your guy did it. He just was justified because he said they shot at him first. But as what turned out, it was self-defense, but the forensic evidence, the blood spatter, because when a bullet, the bullet went through a kid's head. So the bullet goes through, obviously, blood and everything, and, the brain splashes on the back, right? And so if the bullet came through the back window like these folks had claimed and hit the kid, the blood splatter would have gone to the front window, right? But in this case, the blood splatter went backwards towards where my client was. So that he had to have been shot because my client was said that these people shot at him first. And these people are like, of course, like, we don't have a gun. This guy's just making it all up. But the bullet had to come from inside the car based on what we proved because of where the blood was.
So he said it was self-defense because he did shoot back, but the bullet didn't hit anyone.
Right.
But it turns out someone in the car when they were shooting at him shot him.
Shot the kid.
He shot the kid who died.
Right, because the boy in the car.
That ended up being the outcome of the case?
Well, it was about a 10-minute acquittal. It doesn't matter if in a criminal setting, it doesn't matter if you prove your client's innocence. 9 out of 10 prosecutors won't stop. Because if you prove your client's innocence in the middle of a trial, their mind frame is, if I stop now, then they can use this against our office. They can say, how many more innocent people have you prosecuted? If you can admit that you messed up and you have an innocent man here that you tried to put in prison for the rest of his life. And so it's a lot easier for them just to let the trial play out, let the person be acquitted because they're innocent. But then they can say, oh, we really believe he was guilty, but they had a good lawyer who argued reasonable doubt and this technicality. Yeah. And so we're still right because that's just the currency they trade on, that they're always right. They, very rarely admit that they made a mistake. Very few prosecutors are willing to stand up and say, we made a mistake.
Wow. So that ego getting wrapped up in a case can basically cause a ton of needless incrimination.
And suffering. Yes.
Just because someone doesn't want to lose their job or have their office get threatened or...
Well, it's not even lose their job. It's really it's mostly an ego thing because a prosecutor is basically immune from any lawsuit. Unless they actually frame somebody, which they rarely do. I use the word rarely, of course. But, and that was really scary because when I discovered that the blood splatter evidence proved my client's innocent, now I had to find a blood spatter expert.
So bring me through that. So you're going through Detroit. Bring me through that story of when you're actually seeking the evidence.
Well, we are already picked a jury, already started the trial when I come to this realization based upon my associates showing me evidence. So I filed an emergency motion to amend my witness list to add a blood spatter expert. Mm-hmm. And so I was able to find this world-class blood spatter expert out of Edmonton, Alberta. So he was a Canadian.
He's a blood splatter expert. That's
correct.
That's all he does.
Correct. I even it was long ago and I have a terrible memory, but his name was Joe Slemko. But he was like a lieutenant in the Canadian Mounted Police. That, so he was a police officer. And so he just did this kind of work like occasionally internationally because he was such a foremost expert. And so he only charged me for his airfare and like what his salary was since he was missing work. So it made up for his salary. So he charged me a few $1,000, but he was critical, and what he was saying was obvious, and he was critical to the jury understanding, because the defense called this blood spatter expert, and his whole testimony was, well, there's not enough information here to make a decision. And I'm like, so we have an expert who's world class, testified all over the world. Like he testified in Ireland, the United Arab Emirates, when the royal family, somebody died. It was like this guy had a resume of resumes, and the fact he wasn't really charging me anything, so he wasn't doing it for the money. And so they brought their expert, and I can't remember this expert's name, but I remember he was an expert in glass, ballistics. He had like 10 expertises they'd called him in. So I was like, so let me get this right. You're like a jack of all experts, and because if you're an expert in everything, you're an expert in nothing. And his whole conclusion was there's not enough. So there wasn't enough information. It was such a waste of time, nonsense to call this expert. And then
so the expert was not able to prove the blood splatter.
No, my expert it was logical. You wouldn't even need an expert, right?
Yeah.
It's like if I hey, if we did an expert tell you about gravity and like, hey, this cap just dropped.
Yeah.
Would you need an expert to explain gravity?
So the proof was that clear that the blood splatter did not go in the direction of where the bullet entered.
Correct.
Okay.
But still, you have to, I think I would have won the case without the expert, but when you're playing with a zero sum, there's not a lot of margin for error in a murder case. But so our expert was clear as day, and the state's expert was nonsense. I mean, just trying to
I got it.
So they call it expert just to try to cause confusion. Not saying our guy was wrong, but just saying that we don't have enough information. But their expert was the most unqualified bozo there ever was. So that's why it was like a 10-minute acquittal. But then, of course, afterwards, the prosecutor filed a grievance against me. So I had to go, with a bar saying that, I wasn't fair to him. The guy was such a whiner. I think he's disbarred now because I remember a couple years after, I think his name was, I can't remember his name. So I say it was like, I don't want to say his name, but it's not important because I saw he got arrested for domestic violence. Of course, it made my little heart smile to see him lose his job because he was such a horrible human being. He was literally horrible. Like he gave me pictures, like 3 days into trial of the scene that I asked him for. I mean, the guy was just the biggest cheater there ever was. So
when you went to deep Detroit, talk to me about that experience.
Well, I had to go look at the scene, right? And so this was very deep in Detroit, and let's just say I stood out like a sore thumb, and I just remember like knocking on doors, walking up and down the street with with my client and his some of his friends, because they were like, this is not a safe place for you because you stand out, so we'll stay with you. Trying to interview witnesses to see who had seen what. And, it's just a very, you just have no idea, like the variety of life in some communities until you actually go there and walk around and see how life is. But it was nerve wracking. And it was, because I remember my client came from a very poor family, because I remember going to his mom's house because she was slightly off. And in the living room was a lawnmower. A very nice lawnmower, and they had a nice lawn. I'm like, why is the lawnmower in the living room? Like, we can't leave it outside. Somebody will steal it. And I was like, huh. And then craziest thing was this guy's brother got charged with attempted murder, and I represented him, got him acquitted because he was acting in self-defense too. But then like 2 weeks after that, or like a month after that, he'd actually murdered somebody for a cell phone. It's crazy. So now he's in prison. He's in prison for life. And some people ask me like, don't you feel bad that you got this, you got this guy acquitted even though they went and killed somebody? I'm like, no, I don't. Because he was innocent of what they accused him of, in my case. And the fact he goes and decides to murder somebody, I can't predict the future. Yeah. I mean, it's like, so.
And I just think it's a perfect example of the service that lawyers provide, right? I mean, like you provide the service of the truth, aligning the truth with the outcomes of the court.
That's the goal.
That's what you're bridging the gap on, right? And you have to stay emotionally attached to the fact that a lawyer's job is to bridge that gap between the truth and the outcome of a case. Right? And if that means someone decides to go and murder someone after you make them win a case or help them win a case, that's their decision.